In this lecture, we're going to look at the first cousin of adverse selection, known as moral hazard. In the lecture, we're going to look at the following topics: moral hazard as the second form of asymmetric information. Remember, hidden information. Mechanisms used to address moral hazard. The types of scenarios we find where moral hazard shows up. And then we're going to look at the principal-agent relationship and define it. And finally, the residual claimant, effort, and risk sharing. Consider the concept of moral hazard. So we have asymmetric information that leads to adverse selection, where one party in a transaction has private information that's hidden, a hidden characteristic or hidden information. And the second form of asymmetric information is moral hazard, where we have unobservable action by one person or firm that affects the outcome of a transaction. This is known as hidden action. Similar to adverse selection, typically both parties in the transaction are worse off as a result of moral hazard. Moral hazard normally results in a deadweight loss due to inefficiency because incentives are misaligned. Let's look at an example of moral hazard in auto insurance. I love it, all these examples about automobiles. Suppose a naive insurance company is willing to sell you an auto insurance at $400 discount if you agree to fully obey the driving laws. If you fully observe all the driving laws, then he'll give you a $400, or the company will give you a $400 discount. You'll like this option because you prefer to drive safe with the $400 discount versus violating the occasional driving law without the $400. But then you ask the obvious question: how can the insurance company know whether I'm fully obeying all the laws? If they can't fully monitor, then why observe the laws, because doing so makes no difference in the cost of insurance? So then moral hazard becomes problematic because the insurance company knows that you have an incentive to not fully observe the driving laws even though you promised to do so. So the insurance company will therefore not offer you the $400 discount, and you will drive without observing all of the laws, which is inefficient. But you and the insurance company end up with the least desirable of the two outcomes. The moral hazard has caused the market to fail. There's a deadweight loss in this scenario, although more information is needed to actually calculate what that deadweight loss would be. So which of the following situations is not considered moral hazard? This is something you have to think about. Managers who are not able to hire high-quality workers at a competitive wage rate. Managers whose high-quality workers work less than the efficient level when offered a fixed competitive wage. Farmers with crop insurance choosing a crop that would not be chosen in the absence of insurance. Or professors who would like to allocate some of the course grade for effort exerted but are unable to find an effective way to do so. I'll leave that up to you to consider and mull over. A second example of moral hazard. Suppose you have the choice of hiking in wilderness area S or R. If you knew that you had to pay for the full cost of a rescue if something goes wrong, you will choose the safe area S. Now this is a problem that we have sometimes on the North Shore of Vancouver, in the mountainous areas there. If you knew that the Search and Rescue Society will cover the cost of the rescue, then you are incentivized to choose the risky area R. The government is reluctant to force you to pay for your own rescue over concerns that you will wait too long to call for help. The outcome is that many hikers go into risky wilderness areas unprepared and face no consequence for their lack of preparation when they need to be rescued. A third example. You hire a lawyer and would like the lawyer to devote a high level of effort on your case over the next 3 weeks. The lawyer indicates that this level of effort will cost you $20,000 and you're fine with the quote. With a fixed fee, the lawyer has an incentive to devote medium effort since it is not possible for you to observe how hard she's working on your behalf. She'll blame an unfavorable court outcome on bad luck rather than insufficient effort. You know the lawyer's incentives and therefore choose not to pay the premium price to obtain the above average effort, unless of course you know the lawyer. A fourth example, many people hire financial advisors to manage their savings, their stock and bond portfolio. The annual fee for this service can be as high as 1.5% of the market value of the portfolio. The advisor promises continually to optimize the portfolio, but you understand that he also has an incentive to churn and select products that give him a bigger commission. With so much unexplained variability in financial returns, it's not possible for you to know if he's working in your best interest. You may therefore choose to use self-directed investing instead. Now, this becomes a real problem when you get my age and you start looking at retirement. So which of the following is best explained by the existence of moral hazard? When rental cars are sold, the price is generally lower than the price of cars with the same model, age, and mileage. Long-distance truck drivers normally have monitors which track speed and driving time. So in the rental car situation, the price is generally lower than the price of cars for the same model and age and mileage, because in one case you've got all kinds of different drivers and the drivers have no incentive not to damage your car, in other words, to drive it hard. Long-distance truck drivers normally have monitors which track speed and driving time. That's a way to try and address moral hazard. When make-up midterm exams are made available, the level of reported illness by students is typically higher on the day before the exam versus the day after the exam. Yes, but that's not, I'm not sure that that's moral hazard, because you can tell the illness of a student is probably the fact that he or she did not study for the exam. Which of the following scenarios best relates to moral hazard? The person whose action is hidden is always better off as compared to the perfect information outcome. Moral hazard is a much more serious problem than adverse selection. Even though actions cannot be observed, they can often be inferred by analyzing incentives. And moral hazard market failures are typically corrected with a government subsidy. Well, I think A would be on my list here, but think it over. A strong caveat. An implicit assumption is that agents will work less if they can get away with it. That's not always reasonable. This assumption is reasonable if the opportunity cost of the agent is liquid. For example, a university professor may choose to work on an external consulting job instead of preparing lecture notes. However, most professors do not work as consultants, and most work on lecture notes far more than what they can get away with. So in other words, they do more effort than just simply what they can get away with. They do this because of their desire to share their knowledge with students. Yeah, that's one reason. There's another reason that has to do with how your colleagues look upon your work and everything like that. But that's true. The assumption that people will always work less if they can get away with it is a questionable core assumption of the theory of moral hazard. And that is one of the problems with many of the theories of the institutional economists. They are correct in many ways, but it's really hard to pin them down. Principal-agent relationship, known as PA. The principal-agent relationship refers to any situation where a principal P contracts with an agent A to perform some service. Employees are agents of managers. A manager is the agent of shareholders. A broker is the agent of an investor. A lawyer is the agent of a client. The payoff to the principal depends on the actions of the agent, and this action cannot be perfectly monitored. Agency relationships often lead to inefficient actions by the agent, which in turn leads to suboptimal compensation for the agent because of moral hazard. Now, you'll see here that there's a paper that I wrote, Forest Carbon Offsets and Carbon Emissions Trading, Problems of Contracting, and in there I discussed the principal-agent problem. So if we look at the agent being the peasant farmer and the principal being the owner of the land, then what happens is the owner tells the peasant who's farming the land to plant trees in order to get a carbon offset payment. Then the landowner deals with what we call an aggregator. An aggregator is somebody who collects these forest carbon offsets over a large area so that they have enough carbon offsets that they can sell in the marketplace. And in this case, then the aggregator is the principal and the landowner is the agent. Then we have a certifier who has to certify these carbon offsets, and the certifier is the principal here, and the aggregator is the agent. And finally, the person who's buying the credits, or selling them rather, on the voluntary market is the principal, and the certifier is the agent. So now suppose I buy carbon offset credits to offset my emissions from my big truck or something like that. Or maybe because I'm flying somewhere and I feel guilty about the CO2 that I release, I want to buy voluntary credits to assuage my guilt. So I go and I purchase these credits. The certifier is happy, and the seller, of course, is happy. But suppose that down below, the peasant suddenly realizes that he can get away with, or she can get away with, planting a crop because the price of corn or the price of rice has just gone up, and planting trees simply doesn't pay for it. So there is no one looking over the shoulder to make sure that the peasant is indeed planting trees rather than growing rice. While the landowner realizes that the peasant has to pay rent to him, so the landowner isn't really going to tell the aggregator that the peasant is not living up to the contract. And the aggregator, who's basically the carbon offsets have been certified, while that aggregator certainly does not have the incentive to go after the landowner to get the peasant to plant trees, because the carbon offsets have already been passed up and sold in the voluntary market. Now the certifier has no incentive to go after the aggregator for the simple reason that the certifier gets paid on the basis of certifying forest carbon offsets. And if that certifier is too diligent in pursuing cases where someone has committed an offense that means that they did not purchase enough carbon off, or didn't do what was required to create these carbon offsets, they're not about to go after the aggregator. They're not about to monitor to ensure that the right amount of trees were planted by the peasant to begin with. Because if they're too diligent in monitoring, then they don't create enough or don't certify enough carbon offsets. And of course, the buyer isn't going to go after it because they have been duped. And if they realize they're duped, they don't want people to know that they've been duped. So along this entire chain, you've got a principal-agent relationship or relationships, but there's no one who's interested in ensuring that there's no moral hazard. So that's the main problem of moral hazard. Now, if we look at risk and uncertainty, the principal-agent relationships are defined by both hidden action, since principal can't observe the agent's effort, And the principal doesn't have any incentive in many cases to observe and monitor the effort. And there's uncertainty in revenue. Uncertainty is important because it means that the agent can choose low effort and then blame bad outcomes on bad luck. The principal can incentivize the agent through profit sharing, bonuses, stock options, etc., but this will typically make the agent's compensation risky. Shifting risk from a risk-neutral principal to a risk-averse agent creates a new type of efficiency loss. Principal-agent theory features the trade-off between incentives to raise effort toward the efficient level and this risk sharing. So it is common for farmers to rent cropland from absentee landowners. In which of the following situations is moral hazard the most likely? The farmer pays the landowner a fixed cash rent. The landowner pays the farmer a fixed salary to farm the land. The farmer and landowner share the crop output with 2/3 going to the farmer and 1/3 going to the landowner. This is a different situation than the one I discussed in terms of carbon offset credits. So the answer really is C. Fixed fee contracts. A fixed fee contract provides the agent with a fixed compensation regardless of the level of agent effort, profits, etc. This describes the compensation scheme for most middle managers. And it also is the one that usually is the one that involves these carbon offset carbon credits. A fixed fee contract has very poor incentive properties and very good risk properties for the agent. Fixed fee contracts are seldom optimal. Features are needed to improve effort incentives for the agent to avoid moral hazard. Residual claimant. Who is the residual claimant? Well, it's the person who earns the residual profit flow after fixed expenses have been paid. Suppose a landowner hires a farmer to grow corn and the farmer is paid a fixed salary S. The landowner is the residual claimant because his net revenues, or his profit, which we denote pi, and we have a superscript L to denote that it's the landowner, his net revenues, or her net revenues, equal R minus the fixed salary. So whatever the revenue is minus that fixed salary. It moves 1-for-1 with market revenue. So the profit changes with market revenue because S is fixed. Suppose instead the farmer pays a fixed lease cost, L, to rent the land from the farmer. Now the farmer is the residual claimant because her net earnings, pi F, are equal to R minus the lease, where R is the revenue again. And again, it moves 1-for-1 with market revenue. Now the agent becoming the residual claimant. Instead of the principal paying the agent a fixed salary, which induces moral hazard, suppose the agent is made the residual claimant. If the residual profit flow from the principal is provided, a fixed level of compensation is strongly linked to the agent's effort. These are high-powered incentives. Then the agent will choose the efficient level of effort, which solves the moral hazard problem, but it makes the net compensation for the agent risky. Shifting risk to the agent is not always an efficient outcome if the principal, in particular, is risk neutral, a landowner, say, and the agent is risk averse. Then we don't have that same thing. And high effort or large effort is not always the efficient outcome. Suppose you hire a lawyer to work on a real estate transaction. With low effort, the transaction has a 50% chance of generating $30,000, but it also has a 50% chance of generating $60,000. For the same for high effort, except the payoffs are $70,000 and $100,000. So there's a large increase in the payoff when the lawyer has a high effort. The expected gain from using a high versus low effort can be calculated as 1/2 times 70,000 plus 1/2 times 100,000 minus 1/2 times 30,000. So in other words, 1/2 times 40,000 plus the other one is 1/2 of 60,000. So 1/2 of 40,000 again is 40,000. Suppose the lawyer's effort is C as a function of effort L, where L refers to lawyer, or low effort, pardon me, and C effort high. So C is the cost is a function of high effort. The high effort outcome is efficient and in society's best interest only if 40,000 is greater than the difference in the cost between the high and the low levels of effort. Agricultural production is the one that many people have studied quite a bit. A landowner would like a farmer to grow a crop on her land. Option A, pay the farmer a fixed salary to grow the crop. Option B, rent the land to the farmer for a fixed amount R. Option A has poor incentive properties but good risk properties. Option B, the farmer is the residual claimant on profits. Residual claimants have strong effort incentives, but also bear the full risk of the enterprise. An intermediate solution is to crop share, where input expense and crop revenues are shared 1/3 for the landowner and 2/3 for the farmer. And that 1/3, 2/3 is very common in rental agreements in agriculture on the prairies, say. So the ugly side of incentive contracts can be found in Pay Matters, the Peace Rate and Health in the Developing World. Piece rate pay remains a common form of compensation in developing world industries. While the piece rate may boost productivity, it has been shown to have unintended consequences for occupational safety and health, including increased accident and injury risk. All right, so if you're paid on the basis of a piece rate, you work harder to put out the number of pieces. The Vietnamese garment workers in this sample worked an average of 90 hours per week, earning the equivalent of $156 per month or 40 cents per hour. Finally, what is your day-to-day moral hazard? How would you drive differently and where would you park differently if you had to operate your car with no insurance? How would you play sports differently if you were living in the US and had no medical coverage? I know my daughter has faced that kind of a decision and as a result would not play sports at certain occasions. How different would you contribute to group work if your contribution was perfectly measurable and the grade you received adjusted according to your contribution? Think about this when you're doing your homework assignments.